I stood by the window, watching as the car backed out of the driveway, turned right, and finally disappeared down the street. I found myself wondering why I wasn't more upset. I had just witnessed 10 years of my life drive away, yet there was no surge of emotion. Shouldn't I have felt something? Shouldn't there have been more than just a shrug? Well, I figured I might as well take care of that dripping faucet. As I turned toward the kitchen, I replayed the last half hour in my mind. I had come home from work to find Linda, my wife, sitting at the kitchen table with a full glass of wine in front of her. Right then, I knew something was off. For starters, she was home before me. She never got home before I did, usually arriving a half hour to an hour later. Then, there was our unspoken agreement that whoever got home first would start dinner, and the stove was cold. And then there was the wine. Linda hardly ever drank. As soon as I stepped into the room, she asked me to sit down, saying she had something to tell me. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, sat down across from her, and she said, "Sam, I know you've noticed it too. Something's been off between us for the past 6 months or so. I can't quite figure out why we seem to be drifting apart. I don't know if it's something with me or something with you, but something isn't right. I've tried to talk to you about it, but all you do is brush it off, saying we're just going through a rough patch and it'll get better. But I've made up my mind, we need to separate. I'm not talking about divorce, just some time apart. I need some space, Sam. I need to get away, reflect on my life, and figure out where this disconnect between us is coming from. Maybe you can use this time apart to do the same from your side. Come on, Lynn. It's not that bad. Sure, we've had some problems. What marriage doesn't? But two people can't work out their issues if they're apart and not communicating. Talking isn't going to help, Sam. In your mind, the only problem we have is that we're not making love. Your solution is for me to strip down and let you have your way with me. But as far as I'm concerned, there's a lot more wrong. We don't make love because I don't want to. We don't cuddle anymore because I don't want you touching me, and I don't even know why I feel that way. I still love you, Sam. I love you as much as I did on our wedding day. But something is wrong, and I need space to figure out what it is. So you want to throw away 10 years of marriage? No, Sam. I just think we need some time apart. I've already packed my things and loaded them into the car. I'm going to stay with my sister until I find a place of my own. I'll call you once a week to check in. She stood up and said, I have to go. I promised Rachel I'd be there by 7. She turned and walked away without even offering a goodbye kiss, and that alone told me exactly where I stood. Word quickly spread that Linda and I had separated. Most of our friends were sympathetic, going out of their way to cheer me up. Linda called me once a week, asking how I was doing, and I'd tell her I was managing. Then I'd ask how she was, and she'd say she was okay. I'd ask if she was ready to come home yet, and she'd always say, not yet. Lynn had been gone for 6 weeks when I started hearing things, disturbing things. Rumors that she had a live-in boyfriend. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to think that she was just taking time to clear her head and would eventually come back home. But the rumors kept coming, so I decided to investigate. I figured I'd find out where she was staying, do some snooping, and put the rumors to rest. But nobody could, or would, tell me where she was, and I began to think that something really stunk about the whole situation. Over dinner with my friend James and his wife Sarah, I voiced my concerns and casually mentioned that I was considering hiring a private detective to track down Lynn and either confirm or debunk the rumors. I noticed James glance at Sarah, and she gave him a slight nod. Save your money, Sam, James said. The rumors are true. Most of us know what's going on, but no one had the heart to tell you. Tell me what? That Linda left you to live with Eric Moore. Eric Moore? Who the hell is Eric Moore? I've never even heard of the guy. He works with Linda, and she just up and left me to shack up with him? That doesn't make sense. If that's what she was planning, why not just divorce me? What's with the separation bullshit? You know Lynn, Sam. She's a planner. She always has a backup plan and even a backup for her backup. She's been seeing more for almost a year. I'm guessing she went with the separation so she could have the option to come back if living with Moore turned out to be worse than just having an affair with him, and everyone knew this, but no one told me. Wow, what a great bunch of friends I've got. I stood up abruptly, tossing my napkin onto the center of the table, and said, "Thanks a lot. I'll see myself out." I left their house without looking back. During the drive home, my mind raced with everything I had just learned. No sex with Lynn for over a year because she didn't want to be with me. No snuggling because she didn't want me touching her. And all the while, she was making a fool out of me. I had been sitting at home like a naive little boy, behaving myself, waiting for that unfaithful woman to return. And all my so-called friends, those wonderful friends of mine, knew exactly what was going on. They just let me sit there, staring at the walls, waiting like an idiot. Well, the waiting was over. The next morning, I made an appointment with the Corliss Investigative Agency and handed over a retainer. I gave them the details about where Lynn and this Moore guy worked, telling them I wanted every bit of dirt they could dig up on the two of them. Then, I went home and started making a list of everything I needed to do to sever my ties with Lynn. I planned to wait for the detective's report, but when it arrived, I wanted to be ready with my list. After finishing the list, I leaned back and thought about something else that needed doing. I hadn't been laid in nearly 16 months, what with Lynn denying me for a year and then the separation. I had been a faithful husband, but now that I knew what Lynn was really up to, there was no way I was going to keep playing the celibate fool. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping a beer, and started planning how to end my long dry spell. But then, I remembered what James had said about Lynn, how she planned everything. After living with her as long as I had, I knew it was true. That meant she had likely planned for what to do if I found out about her cheating. She probably had contingency plans based on how she thought I'd react and, most importantly, a strategy to screw me over if she decided living with Moore was what she really wanted. I could see her having me watched, so if I so much as dipped my wick elsewhere, she'd be ready to use it against me in a divorce. Suddenly, the list I had made seemed worthless. She might have anticipated everything I had planned to do. It was back to the drawing board. A new list began to take shape, and as it did, I realized a lot of what I wanted to do had to be done immediately, not at the last minute. There were things I could do that would really stick it to Lynn and make her bleed. I smiled at the thought, wondering if she had ever prepared for something like that. The next morning, I went to the bank to deposit my paycheck. While I was there, I checked on the safe deposit box that Lynn and I shared. From the log, I saw that Lynn had been checking the box at least once a week. That confirmed it. She was keeping tabs on me, ready to pounce at the first sign that I was onto her. I thought about that for a moment, then took the 5 certificates of deposit from their plastic envelopes, went upstairs, and used the bank's copy machine to make duplicates of all 5. I returned the copies to the envelopes and put them back in the box. Unless Lynn took the CDs out to inspect them, she'd never know about the switch. Since I knew Lynn was monitoring me, I took my passport from the box and casually mentioned to the bank clerk, as she put the box back, that I was heading to Mexico for a fishing trip. I walked out of the bank with the 5 CDs in my pocket. Typically, I visited the bank about twice a week. Each visit, I cashed in 1 CD, paid the early withdrawal penalty, and then hid the cash away when I got home. I wasn't a fan of credit cards, believing they could easily lead to trouble. The only ones I had were an American Express card, which required the full balance to be paid each month, a few gasoline company cards, and a low-limit Visa card in my name only. Lynn, on the other hand, had a good half-dozen credit cards in just her name, some with pretty high limits. I knew what those limits were because I paid the bills every month. I made a note of the remaining account balances and set it aside, making sure to keep up with the minimum payments to keep them in good standing. Next, I made a list of all the things I wanted, and over the course of the next few weeks, I went on a spending spree using Lynn's credit cards. When I bailed, she'd be stuck with the debt, and I intended to make sure it was substantial. I upgraded my computer, bought a new Dell with all the bells and whistles, snagged a Remington 700 on eBay, and picked up a bunch of other stuff like a digital camera and a state-of-the-art cell phone that did everything but cook my dinner. The house was Lynn's. It had been left to her by her parents, so I had no claim to it. But we had used it as collateral for an open line of credit when we installed the swimming pool and hot tub, and both our signatures were on the account. We had paid off what we borrowed, but the line of credit was still open. If I timed it right, I could draw on that line before Lynn knew what I was up to. I had wondered why, when she decided we needed a trial separation, she packed up and left me in her house instead of asking me to leave. Now I knew, if I was still in the house, I'd obviously be expecting her to come back. Naturally, I saw this separation as something that wasn't meant to last. Next, I cashed out my 401k at work, paid the penalty, and stashed the cash away. Then, I sat back and waited for the private detective's report. The one thing I couldn't figure out was how to scratch the itch that had been growing for 16 months. I couldn't risk Lynn having someone keep tabs on me to see if I strayed. So, I decided that I'd have to take weekend trips, claiming I was going fishing. Lynn knew how much I loved fishing and that I went often. She'd seen the catches I brought home, so I doubted she'd hire a private detective to follow me. No need for her to get that carried away, right? After all, wasn't I just the idiot she'd been fooling for over a year? It was a Friday, and I was getting ready to leave work when I got a call from Sarah, asking me to stop by their house on the way home. I tried to beg off, but she insisted it was important, so even though I really didn't want to go, I agreed. When I got there, she let me in and led me to the living room, where I found James sitting in an easy chair. He got up, offered me his hand, and I shook it. Then, he told me to sit down and make myself comfortable while he got me a beer. "Sarah needs to talk with you, Sam," he said, "and you should know I'm 100% on board with what she's about to say." He headed to the kitchen while I gave Sarah a questioning look. She said, "Just a minute, Sam. You're going to need a beer for this." James came back, handed me a Bud Light, and said, "I've got some errands to run, and I probably won't be back before midnight. Catch you later." Then he headed for the front door, and I heard it close behind him. That was Sarah's cue to start talking. "Sam, you were justified in being angry when you stormed out the other night." "It still hurt, though," she began. I started to say something, but she held up her hand. "Let me finish. In our defense, all I can say is that we care about you a lot, and we didn't want to be the ones to hurt you. It's complicated because we're also friends with Lynn. We were hoping she'd come to her senses and return to you where she belongs. We know you love her, or at least you did, but we weren't sure if it was enough for you to forgive her, so we kept quiet. If you got back together without knowing, you could have moved on with your lives without the burden of forgiving and forgetting. That's our apology, but it's only part of why James and I wanted you to come by. We know you, Sam, and we know the kind of man you are. You'd no sooner cheat on your wife than rob a bank. So, how long has it been since you last had sex?" The question caught me completely off guard. For the first time, I really noticed how Sarah was dressed: low-cut blouse showing off her ample cleavage, short skirt, and high heels that highlighted her stunning legs. Friend or not, I couldn't help but feel a surge of arousal. Then I remembered James's "I'm 100% on board" comment and began to suspect where this was headed. In a quiet voice, I admitted, "It's been a year and a half." Sarah leaned in closer, giving me a better view down her blouse as she huskily said, "I'd like to change that, Sam. James is my friend, Sarah." "I can't do that to him." I started to get up, but she grabbed my arm and pulled me back down. "James is okay with this, Sam. That's why he left, to give us time alone. This isn't pity sex. James and I have been discussing this for months. You have something we want, and hopefully, I can help you, and you can help us. I don't understand what you're saying. To be blunt, Sam, James is sterile, and we want a child. We want you to give me one. I was stunned, speechless. When I finally found my voice, I asked, "You just said you knew I wouldn't cheat on Lynn." "Yes," she said, placing a hand on the bulge in my pants, "but that was before you knew what Lynn's been doing. Now that you know, you're released from your vows to her. Why me? We want it to be someone we know, not some anonymous sperm donor. We also want you to be a part of the child's life. You'll be the godfather, always around as Uncle Sam." "This doesn't make any sense, Sarah." "Of course it does. What if something happened to James and me? Who better to care for the child than Uncle Sam? And God forbid, what if the child needed a liver transplant or something like that? Could we track down an anonymous sperm donor? And even if we did, would he help? If we got on a waiting list, how long would we have to wait for a match?" "No, Sam, we've thought this through. We want you to be part of our family. And besides," she added, starting to touch me suggestively, "are you going to tell me you don't find me attractive? This says otherwise." She pulled me closer and whispered, "There are benefits to being the father of my child, Sam. We'll need to make love many, many times to make sure I get pregnant. I won't limit you to just my most fertile days. In fact, I won't even tell you when they are. It could take weeks, Sam. Weeks and weeks. And you've been without for how long? We'll be good for each other, Sam," she whispered as her lips trailed along my neck. It had been so long for me, and I knew I wouldn't last very long. "Let's take this to the bedroom and really start making that baby," Sarah said, her voice thick with desire. Any doubts I had vanished the moment she went down on me, so I got up and followed her into the bedroom without hesitation. We undressed, watching each other closely, the tension between us thickening with every discarded piece of clothing. Sarah climbed onto the bed, spreading her legs wide, her eyes locked on mine. "From what I've read," she said, her voice husky, "the hotter the sex, the more likely it is for the sperm to reach the egg. No sweet and tender stuff, Sam, make my blood boil, make me scream, and screw my brains out." She pulled me toward her, whispering, "Take me, Sam. Breed me." I climbed onto the bed and we had the most intense sex I'd ever experienced. It felt so much better than it had with Lynn. As soon as I finished, Sarah quickly grabbed a pillow and stuffed it under her hips, elevating herself so that my sperm could flow deeper inside her. The sight of her lying there, so determined and focused, made me start to harden again. I slipped back inside her for another round, secretly hoping it wouldn't take so she'd need me to come back and do it again. When I pulled out the second time, Sarah once again propped herself up with the pillow. We went at it one more time before I left to head home, and just before she let me out the front door, she kissed me and thanked me for what I'd done. "I'd love to do this every day until I get pregnant," she said, "but James is used to making love 3 or 4 times a week. Even though he's okay with this, I won't give him sloppy seconds. Call me tomorrow, okay?" I thought about what had just happened all the way home. As I pulled into my driveway, it hit me that if Lynn had someone watching me, they'd notice my frequent visits to James and Sarah's house and might start piecing things together, especially since James would leave and I'd stay for hours afterward. The next morning, I called Sarah to share my concerns, but she quickly reassured me. "Don't worry, Sam," she said. "No one will see James leave because he doesn't. He goes down to his basement workshop and stays there until you leave." That bit of information gave me pause. It was one thing to be with Sarah when James was out of the house, but could I really do it knowing you was just downstairs? Sarah must have sensed my hesitation because she added, "Don't worry, Sam. It'll be fine." I promise. Later that afternoon, James called and asked me to grab a drink with him after work. Talk about awkward, sitting down with a guy you've known for 20 years, who's a good friend, and whose wife you've just slept with, all with his blessing. He must have seen the unease on my face because he got straight to the point. "I know this is awkward for you, Sam. Hell, it's awkward for me too, but we need to talk about what's going on. First off, like I told you before, I'm 100% okay with this. I mean that. But there's more you need to know. Sarah didn't tell you everything. Yes, she wants a child, and yes, I'm sterile, but there's something else. To be blunt, buddy, I can't get it up. I haven't been able to make love to Sarah in over a year. My mind reeled. No wonder Sarah had been so eager and intense last night. She was making up for lost time. Her talk about not wanting to give James sloppy seconds now made sense. It was her way of covering for his inability. She didn't want me to know he was impotent, probably because she was worried I'd think less of him as a man. Not that I would have, but she didn't know that. The contrast between her and Lynn hit me hard. Sarah put James first, even in such a tough situation, while Lynn only ever thought of herself. James continued, I don't know if it came through to you last night, but Sarah is a highly sexual person. My not being able to perform has been driving her crazy. She's tried so hard to keep it together, Sam, but eventually, she would have ended up cheating on me. I know that sounds harsh, but it's the truth. She loves me, and she'd do her best to hide it, but I'd know. How could I not? If she got laid, she wouldn't be climbing the walls anymore, and I'd notice. I love her, Sam. She's everything to me. Without her, I'd be lost, and that's the problem. If she snuck around behind my back, I couldn't live with it. Even though I'd understand why she did it, I couldn't handle the dishonesty. So, the only solution I could see was to make it happen openly. But Sarah isn't the type to take a lover while I sit in the living room watching TV. She could maybe do it with a stranger in a motel if I didn't know, but not like this, not with different guys week after week. We needed someone steady, someone we both liked and trusted. We made a list of possible candidates, but we kept coming back to you. We were afraid that if we started something with you and then Lynn came back, it would stop, and we'd be back at square one and Lynn will come back to you, Sam. Everyone who knows Eric Moore knows he's a complete jerk, and Lynn will figure that out soon enough. She'll come running back to you, thinking you've been sitting at home, clueless about everything. I don't know why she assumes you're that dumb. I can only guess that she thinks you're so blindly in love with her that it never crossed your mind she might be up to something. I had to chuckle at that. She pretty much nailed it, because that's exactly how it went down. It was only because the separation dragged on and on that I finally started to realize something wasn't right. But now you do know, and I'm sure of one thing, even if Lynn isn't. Now that you're aware, she's history. I know you won't take her back under any circumstances. That's what gave Sarah and me the freedom to approach you. Sarah and I want a child, Sam, and she needs a regular sex life. Until the doctors figure out what's wrong with me, someone else has to fill that role for her. I know it sounds strange, but you making love to my wife is actually saving my marriage. You just have to get comfortable with the fact that I'm aware of it and that I'm okay with it. I didn't know what to say. The whole situation was so bizarre that even though it had already happened once, I was still struggling to believe it. James stared down into his drink, then looked up at me and said, "It kills me not being able to take care of my wife, Sam, but it would kill me even more if I lost her. I need you to do this for me, buddy. Can I count on you?" I stared at him for a few seconds, then nodded. That Sunday, I hosted a barbecue for James, Sarah, and 3 other couples. When the others had left, James retreated to the den to play on my computer while Sarah and I headed up to my bedroom. By the time I was undressed, Sarah was already lying on the bed, urging me to hurry. "This is my house, Sarah," I said with a grin, "and in my house, we do things my way." I kept her legs up on my shoulders, letting gravity give my little guys a head start in their race to her egg. After about 30 seconds, I told her to put a pillow under her hips, and then I let her legs down. Sarah looked up at me and said, "Lynn walked away from this?" The woman must be out of her mind. With that stroke to my ego, I couldn't help but justify it, so I positioned myself over her again in the missionary position. As she tried to coax me back inside her, I laughed and said, "If there's any left at the opening, it's not going anywhere. 5 minutes later, I was deep inside her for the second time. James wasn't kidding when he said Sarah was a highly sexual person. She coaxed a third round out of me before I walked her and James to their car. James shook my hand, and Sarah kissed me on the cheek. We all agreed that the day had been a success and that we should do it again soon. Anyone watching would have thought we were talking about the barbecue. Monday afternoon, I met with David Brown from the Corliss agency. As he handed me the report, he said, "I'm sorry, Sam. Every time I do one of these, I hope it's just a simple misunderstanding and that nothing is actually going on. But in this case, there's no doubt. Your fee also covers our appearance in court if it goes to trial." I shook his hand and left the office. On the drive home, I wasn't nearly as angry as I thought I'd be. It was probably because I'd already accepted the truth, and by the time I got the report, I'd come to terms with everything. The only thing left to do was time my draw on the house's line of credit so Lynn wouldn't find out until it was too late. I planned to see an attorney and get the papers drawn up, but I'd hold off on serving them until I was ready. For the next 5 weeks, I saw James and Sarah 3 or 4 times a week, either at their house or mine. They spread the word that I was going through a rough patch, and they were spending time with me to cheer me up. I still got my weekly phone call from Lynn, but I stopped asking her how she was and when she'd be coming home. Finally, I'd had enough. I wrote checks against the line of credit, and as soon as they cleared, I found an apartment, moved out of the house, and had Lynn served with divorce papers. The papers cited irreconcilable differences instead of adultery. I did it that way so Lynn wouldn't know that I was aware of her affair with Moore. She would see it as my attempt to push her into deciding to come home. She'd call me, feed me some bullshit about how I was overreacting, and then probably suggest we meet for a drink and dinner, where she'd try to calm me down and talk some sense into me. I'd agree to meet, listen to her, and then tell her I'd think about it. That would buy me a few days for the checks to clear and for me to empty out the checking and savings accounts. It went exactly as I expected. First, the phone call came, telling me I was being unreasonable, that there was no need to get attorneys involved. I told her I was tired of being stuck in limbo. She didn't want to be with me, so it was time for me to accept it and move on with my life. I agreed to meet her at Angelo's. It was the first time I'd seen her since she walked out, and damn, she looked good. I was going to miss her. Strike that, I already missed her. It was obvious to me that I still loved her. But even if she came crawling back, I knew there was no way I could ever live with her again. Of course, I didn't tell her that. Instead of responding, I just sat there, letting her feed me a line of bullshit. She talked about seeing an analyst who was helping her understand herself better, blah, blah, blah. Lynn claimed she was making progress and just needed a little more time. I know it's hard on you, baby, but it's just as hard on me. Please, just a little more time, she pleaded. I told her I'd think about it and let her know. 2 days later, I called my attorney and told him it was time to move on to step 2. He quashed the divorce papers and sent Lynn a notice that the filing had been canceled. I got a call from Lynn at work, thanking me and assuring me that I wouldn't regret it. I smiled to myself, knowing that I didn't regret it, but for reasons she was still blissfully unaware of. She'd find out soon enough. That night, I had dinner at James and Sarah's, and afterward, Sarah and I retired to her bedroom. As she spread herself out for me, she said, "Can we make love tonight instead of just screwing? I want to make love to the father of my child, are you sure, positive?" The home test told me on Tuesday, and the doctor confirmed it this afternoon. "You're going to be a daddy." We only did it once that night, but it was a long, slow, and deeply satisfying session. When it was over, I told her it might be a while before I saw her again. I'm ending the farce with Lynn and Moore this week, and I may have to leave town for a while. Don't do anything too drastic, lover. I'm going to need the father of my baby around. That would be James, sweetie. You need to start thinking like that, you know what I mean, lover. Just because I'm pregnant doesn't mean I'm not going to need you anymore. Eric Moore was a member of the Fraternal Order of Eagles, and since being elected Sergeant at Arms, he never missed a meeting. That Wednesday, he left the meeting in a good mood, confident about his chances for a higher office in the order after talking to some of the influential members. Still riding that high, he got out of his car in the parking lot of his condo, locked the door, and then, bam, a blinding pain hit him before everything went black. A neighbor found him and called 911. The paramedics rushed him to the emergency room, where doctors discovered both his arms and legs had been broken, and the damage to his genital area was so severe that both of his testicles had to be removed. When he woke up in the hospital, groggy and in immense pain, he realized he couldn't move. His arms and legs were in casts, and he was in traction. The first thing he saw was Linda standing next to his bed with a horrified expression on her face before he faded out again. I wasn't there when it happened, of course, but I got a full rundown of the events afterward. Apparently, while Lynn was standing by Moore's bed, a man walked into the room, approached her, and asked if she was Laura Hamilton. When she said yes, he handed her some papers and told her she'd been served. Lynn looked confused as she opened the envelope and saw that she was being sued for divorce, this time on the grounds of infidelity. She stared at the word infidelity, then looked at the wreck of a man lying in the bed, and her face drained of all color as she finally understood what it meant. "Oh my God," she moaned, sinking into a chair as she started to cry. I made sure to stick around long enough for the police to ask me where I was that night. As it turned out, I had an airtight alibi. I was at a poker game that started an hour before the Eagles meeting and lasted until well after Moore was admitted to the hospital. Lynn paid for my alibi, though she didn't realize it. The guys were on my side and would have covered for me anyway, but since the goal was to stick it to Lynn, I used her credit cards to show my appreciation. The home shopping network gladly took her Visa card number for the digital cameras I gave Kevin and Brian. eBay charged her MasterCard for the laptop I gave Jason and the 19-inch flat-screen monitor I gifted to Chris. She even paid for the aluminum baseball bat. With 6 weeks of vacation and 3 weeks of comp time saved up, I took a 2-month leave of absence. Once the police were satisfied that I had nothing to do with Moore's accident, at least nothing they could prove, I made arrangements to leave town and head down to Mexico for a fishing trip. Before I left, I instructed my attorney to hold off on pushing the divorce. I wanted it to sit there until Lynn started fighting it, and then we'd drop it. We'd stay married, but I'd have nothing to do with her. I called James and Sarah once a week to check in. They told me that Lynn had moved back into the house, and as far as anyone could tell, she was trying to convince everyone, including herself, that true love still existed between her and Moore. But it must not have been in the cards, because she never went back to visit him after the day she was served at his hospital bedside. The maxed-out credit card bills must have started piling up in the mailbox, and she likely discovered that the savings and checking accounts were empty. The line of credit was maxed out, and those CDs in the bank deposit box were nothing but fakes. The next thing I heard was that Lynn was frantically trying to find me, but no one could tell her where I'd gone. My boss, who was fully aware of the situation, told Lynn I was gone when she called looking for me. He made it sound like I just up and left one day, asked for my check, and disappeared. He didn't outright say I'd quit without notice, but he definitely led her to believe it. When Lynn called my attorney, demanding he arrange a meeting with me, she was informed that I had dropped the divorce action, paid off my legal fees, and that he no longer represented me. With no other options, Lynn was forced to deal with the fallout on her own. Months passed after I left on my fishing trip, and Lynn eventually had to file for bankruptcy. She lost the house, had to give up her Lexus, and ended up driving a used Geo. When I heard the news, I returned from Mexico, got myself an apartment on the other side of town, far from where Lynn lived, and did my best to avoid places where she might see me. Sarah was 5 months pregnant and looking sexier than ever, and we picked up right where we'd left off. This time, though, we didn't have to worry about anyone keeping tabs on me. 2 or 3 times a week, she either spent the night at my place or I stayed over at hers. I had been back for 2 months before Lynn finally found out, and one day after work, I found her waiting for me in the parking lot. She got out of her car and headed straight for me, but I ignored her, got into my car, and pulled out of the lot. I saw her scramble to her car in my rearview mirror, so I slowed down to make sure she could keep me in sight. I wasn't about to hash things out in the work parking lot, but I was ready to confront her somewhere more private. I kept my speed low, allowing her to follow me easily, and about 10 minutes later, I pulled into the lot at Bud's Bar and Grill. I was already seated at the bar, ordering a Bud Light, when she stormed in, spotted me, and made a beeline for where I was sitting. She started mouthing off as soon as she was close enough. "Don't think you can run from me, you scum sucker," she spat. I knew Lynn well enough to anticipate her next move, so when she swung at my head, I spun around on the stool and caught her wrist mid-swing. I squeezed as hard as I could, and she gasped in pain. "I have every reason in the world to want to hurt you, Lynn, so don't push me too far," I warned. "Keep your hands to yourself unless you want to feel some real pain." I released her wrist and said, "I wasn't running from you. I drove nice and slow so you could follow me here. I'm not airing your dirty laundry in the parking lot where I work. It doesn't matter here, though, because everyone here already knows you're a lying cheat. I want to talk to you, I don't want to talk to you. I've already heard enough of your lies. I want my money back." "What money would that be, Lynn? You owe me for the money you took out against the house, and half of everything else we had was mine. I want it back." "Well, you're not getting it, Lynn. My position is that what I took was restitution for what you did to me. What do the lawyers call it? Compensation for pain and suffering and loss of conjugal rights. I figure what I took just about covers the year and a half I went without sex while you were giving it away to someone else, and the humiliation of everyone looking at me like I was a fool. Damn you, Sam. I lost my parents' home because of you. Big deal, Lynn. It couldn't have meant all that much to you since, as I recall, you moved out to shack up with another man. I mean it, Sam. I want that money. Here's a newsflash for you, Lynn. You're never getting a dime from me. You tried to screw me over, got caught, and I made you pay. Live with it. I guess we'll just have to see what the courts say. Doesn't matter what they say, Lynn. Here's how it'll play out. You'll have to get a lawyer and sue me for divorce to get me into court so the court can issue an order on dividing assets. As soon as you sue, I'll countersue. A good lawyer can drag that out for 6 to 8 months, and during that time, you'll be paying your lawyer. Can you afford to pay him to get nothing? I have all the evidence I need to fight you in court, and if I win, you'll take it in the ass. Worst case scenario for me is that I'm ordered to split the assets. I'll say, okay, judge, and leave the court. You and your lawyer will wait and wait for the money, but it'll never come. You'll call me, but I won't answer. So, your lawyer, who you're still paying, will go back to court and get a court order telling me to pay by a certain date. You'll wait and wait again, and when the deadline arrives, you still won't have seen a dime. Your lawyer, still billing you for his time, will get a judgment against me. But guess what? I have no savings or checking accounts that can be attached. My car is a lease, so nothing there for you. I live in a furnished apartment, so good luck getting anything there. All you can do with your judgment is garnish my wages, and the first time my paycheck gets garnished, I'll quit my job. So, what do we have here, Lynn? A good year's worth of lawyer's fees out of your pocket, and all for maybe $200 out of one paycheck. Your last option is to get the judge to threaten me with jail for contempt of court. But all that'll get you, Lynn, is a postcard from some small fishing village in Mexico where I'll be living until my money runs out. And I've got a lot, thanks to you. Face it, Linda, you screwed me over, got caught, and I got even. Consider yourself lucky. Think about what happened to your boyfriend and consider yourself very lucky. He lost his balls and can never screw with another man's wife again. You, on the other hand, can still spread your legs for whoever you want. I knew it, Lynn hissed. I knew you had something to do with what happened to Eric. What you think you know and what you can prove are two very different things, Lynn. By the way, how's your love affair going? From what I hear, you haven't seen the poor man since his first day in the hospital. What would be the point? You took away the only thing he had going for him. Oh, that's cold, Lynn. Even for you, it's the truth. He was well endowed and a marvelous lover, but I would have tired of him eventually and come home. Oh, gee, Lynn. If only I'd known. All of this unpleasantness could have been avoided if I'd just known you'd come back someday. Oh, damn, I guess by my actions I messed that up, didn't I? I'll have to carry that regret to my grave. Oh, what a joy life could have been if we just communicated better. You can be such an asshole, yes, Lynn, and you're a worthless, cheating piece of trash. I finished my beer, stood up, and said, "Have a rotten life, Lynn," and left the bar. 3 days later, I was served with divorce papers citing irreconcilable differences. I didn't contest it, and she was awarded half of the marital assets and ordered me to repay the money borrowed against the line of credit. I wished her luck getting anything and tossed the final decree in the trash. She must have believed me when I told her how things would go because I never heard from her again. One interesting thing came out of the mess. Everyone agreed that Moore was a dipshit, but even dipshits have friends, and one of Moore's was Lynn's boss. He wasn't happy with how she treated Moore after his misfortune, and he fired her. Well, technically, she was let go due to a downturn in the economy, but everyone knew she was fired. She couldn't find work in our area, so she relocated to California, where she had some relatives. No one, not even her sister, has heard from her since. There's one more chapter to this story. It's a sad ending but also a glorious beginning. Sarah gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, and James doted on her, spoiling her rotten. Uncle Sam was a constant presence, spending many hours crawling around on the floor with little Emily. James never told Sarah or me the full story, but I eventually learned why he had erectile dysfunction. He had cancer, and it wasn't caught in time. The cancer spread, and he passed away. After the funeral, Sarah handed me an envelope addressed to me. Written across the front were the words, "For Sam's eyes only." I looked at her, and she shrugged. I have no idea what it says. It's addressed to you, so I haven't read it. I opened the envelope and read the letter inside. Hey, bud. If you're reading this, I'm gone. There was a reason I picked you. Yes, it was me, not Sarah, who chose you to father our child. I knew I wouldn't be there for them,